Hello, welcome to our event tonight, Call and Response, an author conversation with Angela Jackson Brown and Crystal Wilkinson, moderated by Celeste Williams. I'm so excited to have you join us tonight for this special event. I wanted to make a couple of notes. We do have closed captions available. If you're watching on Zoom, there's a live transcript button at the toolbar, and you can click that button to turn the captions on or off. And you can also select live transcript to show in your chat box if you prefer to see it that way. You can also change the size of the captions by clicking subtitle settings. It's my honor tonight to introduce you to Celeste Williams, who has been involved with the Indiana Writer Center for quite a while and is actually our former board president. She has given the Writer Center a lot of time and energy, and we are so grateful to have her. I think I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm the executive director, Rachel Sahadachny, and it's nice to see you. Celeste Williams is a writer, poet, and playwright. She worked for more than 25 years as a journalist at daily newspapers in Indiana, Alabama, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. She's been nominated for a Pulitzer Prize and won several national reporting and writing awards, including Reporter and Writer of the Year from Scripps Newspapers for a series of stories on extreme poverty in Mississippi. Now living in Indianapolis, she's a volunteer tutor for children affected by homelessness and the former president of the board of directors of the Indiana Writer Center, on which she still serves. We invite you to put your questions for the authors in our Q&A box, or if you can't find that, chat is okay too. Let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. We've been planning this event for some time now, and I am so pleased this day is finally here. Angela Jackson Brown is an award-winning writer, poet, and playwright who teaches creative writing and English at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. She is a graduate of Troy University, Auburn University, and the Spalding Low Residency MFA program in creative writing. She has published her short fiction, creative nonfiction, and poetry in journals like the Louisville Journal and the Appalachian Review. Recently, the Alabama Library Association awarded her the 2021 Alabama Author Award in Poetry. She is author of Drinking from a Bitter Cup, House Repairs, and her latest novel, When Stars Rain Down. Recently, she was awarded the 2021 Alabama Authors Award in Poetry from the Alabama Library Association. Welcome, Angela. Crystal Wilkinson, recently named Poet Laureate of Kentucky, is the award-winning author of The Birds of Opulence, which is winner of the 2016 Ernest J. Gaines Prize for Literary Excellence. She also authored Water Street and Blackberries, Blackberries. Nominated for both the Orange Prize and the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, she has received recognition from the Kentucky Foundation for Women, the Kentucky Arts Council, the Mary Anderson Center for the Arts, the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, and is a recipient of the Chafin Award for Appalachian Literature. She has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize, and her short stories, poems, and essays have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, including most recently in the Oxford American and Southern Cultures. She currently teaches at the University of Kentucky, where she is Associate Professor of English in the MFA in Creative Writing program. Welcome to Call and Response. Angela, Crystal.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
There she is. Hi,
Hi.
Crystal.
Hello.
Hi, Celeste. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Good to see you both.
Great to be here to celebrate you, Angela.
Thank you. There's a lot of events that have happened that I'm like, I'm okay that it's virtual, but I really wish I could reach out and hug you both.
Well, with the theme, call and response, we almost need an audience as well, but we know they're out there, and I hope we will keep them in rapt attention. And thinking about the theme of tonight's talk, this preacher's kid reminisced back to the pews when I remembered how an elder would often start a hymn and the voices would join in, layers, and soon the whole congregation was involved in the musical conversation. So I hope we have a similar time today. It's not exactly church, but here we are. Angela, congratulations on the publishing of your novel.
Thank you so much. I said that I've tried to, not feel bad that on top of everything bad that happened during 2020, there was so much good going on in my life. And there were times when I felt guilty to even bring it up or say something, but I had a lot of friends like Crystal and like you who just said, no, share your good news. We all need some. So I'm just trying to embrace the fact that even in the midst of a 2020, we can still have good things happen. So yeah, it was a good year.
Absolutely. Crystal, tell me about your acquaintance with Angela and how we came to be here tonight.
Well, I think, it's been so long, I might get the dates wrong, but I think it was 2008 or 9 that we met. Angela, was that the first time we met at Spalding?
That's the first time you remember. I was a big fan of yours before then. I actually heard you read from Blackberries. I can't even remember where it was. It was a bookstore, or it may have been one of the many conventions, writers' conventions that takes place in Kentucky, but I got to hear you read. I didn't go up to you because I was still very, how before social media, we were all intimidated to be around authors that we admired. You might get brave enough to go up and let them sign your book, but you didn't try to have a conversation with them. So I saw you, I connected with your work. And at that point I said, I really want to work with her someday. I don't know how that's going to happen, but I knew that I wanted to kind of trail behind you and learn what wisdom you had to share.
Well, what I remember is seeing you that first day, and we've got those wonderful photographs from Spalding, but I remember there not being that many. We both love Spalding, but there weren't that many African-American people, and there weren't that many African-American women, but I was teaching and you were one of the new students, and I just remember going, is that a Black woman, a beautiful Black woman that I can talk to? And then to find out that you were in my workshop was so exciting.
Absolutely. And just hearing people in your stories who sounded like the people that I grew up with. And once again, it validated the stories that I wanted to tell. And so, so I always tell people how important it is when you're looking for a program that you find voices that you connect with, because that would have been, there were some amazing teachers there, don't get me wrong, but I needed to have the validation of rural people in the work of someone I studied with. And you did that.
Well, I was looking at my notes from there. Well, it says it's August 2009, and I was just looking at them and highlighting some of them, and they say the same thing. So although I was your teacher, I was saying things like, I said, your work in particular is such a gift to me that it's a pleasure to read. And somewhere in here, I say exactly what you just said about my work, about your work, that I could see myself in your work. and I don't know, I know you've got this, but I don't know if you remember those quotes. I'll dig them out here in a minute and find them, but it was wonderful to reread this. This is what I said. This voice seems so purely belong to this character, and it feels like you've captured the nuances in his speech. That's not it either, but there's lots of love notes, but there's one where I say that I saw myself in your characters. So it was going both ways. So I love that I don't think I noticed that before, but I felt like I felt connected to you two and your characters in that workshop.
How important is that for people to see themselves in characters? How important is that to you, both of you?
I mean, I think that's everything.
Yeah.
I think we have had our models, right? Angela, I remember for me as a Kentuckian, Gail Jones was one of those models because it was the first time I could see myself as a Black woman from Kentucky in a text that was actually talking about places that I knew. Ernest Gaines did that for me earlier in rural Louisiana, to have those country characters and for them to talk like my people did. So important.
Absolutely. Because like Crystal, I was reading books at a very early age, and my daddy, he had to quit school in the 10th grade because he was a sharecropper. His family was sharecroppers. And so he didn't have the option to stay in school. And so he knew that his little girl loved books, but he didn't really think of it in terms of, oh, I need to find diverse books. It was, I need to find the best book. So he would ask my white teachers, what book should she be reading? And so I had Little House on the Prairie. You couldn't tell me that I wasn't on the prairie. I mean, I was reading Little Women, all of these books, and they were great books and I enjoyed them, but there was never that emotional connection. And so I just, there was a period of time where I wrote a lot of stories as a little girl, and then I kind of stopped because I thought, well, no one wants to hear the stories that I'm wanting to tell. And then my 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Kennedy, gave me I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. She says, this book is going to be too old for you, but if you have questions, you just come and ask me. And I was just caught up on the fact that there was a Black woman on the book. And I was wondering, what in the world is she doing on this book? Because I'd never seen that before. And to have my first Black teacher to introduce me to the first book with Black characters and a Black author, writing about places, Stamps, Arkansas might as well have been Ayrton, Alabama, where I was from. And that opened up the window for me to say, oh, I can be a storyteller like Maya Angelou.
Yeah. Now, Crystal, for you, I remember reading something about your early writing life, and that you're a quiet child, but you still found the wherewithal to write. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I still am. People say they can't really believe that, but I'm an introvert, but I was just wildly bashful as a child and wouldn't hardly say anything. So writing for me was a way to communicate. I would do that with my grandparents. They raised me and I was right there in the same house, and I would write notes to them instead of asking them for something or having a conversation with them. I would write notes to them and pass it to them. And so the funny part was that I thought that when I wrote a book, it was going to be like, you write the book and you just put it out there and I wouldn't have to go with it. And of course I did. So that was a big learning curve for me, to be out with the book. I had never been to a reading except for, local readings with poets, but I'd never been to a reading by an author that I knew or that I admired deeply on a national level. And so I just thought that that's what they do. They publish them, and the books go on out to people, and people read them, and it's great. I didn't realize I'd have to go with it. So after publishing that first book, my life changed. I mean, I had become less bashful at that point, but I think most writers are introverts. We just pretend that we're not when we're out doing things.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I call her Angela Jackson Brown, because she's that public face that I put out there. And then there's the Facebook me. If you judge me by my Facebook, you would think I was the most outgoing person on the planet. But when you get me in a room with strangers, I get awkward. I become that little girl that you wasn't entirely sure if I belonged anywhere. So I agree. And I think it's a part of, I spent a lot of time observing people, and that's where my stories came from. As a little girl, my daddy was a sailor. He was in World War II, and all of his buddies were, former sailors and Army and Marines. And, these hardcore men would be outside sitting, talking, telling stories I probably didn't have any business hearing, but I knew how to make myself small. I could get behind a tree and nobody would even notice for an hour or two that I was there. And I was mentally, taking those stories in. And, many of them, didn't come out of me until, years later. But all of that, I was just taking it in. And so the need to talk, it just wasn't there for me, because I wanted to be around the grown folks. And back then, a child was seen. You were not heard.
Right. You had to stay in a child's place. And while you were out there with the men folk, I was under the kitchen table doing the same thing, eavesdropping in all the business. And somebody would say something and say, "Any kids in here?" And I would just stay under there. And then every so often somebody would say, "Girl, go on out of here." I'd be quiet and just go on out, and then sneak back at some point. But that what Angela said about observation, I think it takes this deep observation to become a writer. And in some ways, being shy or being introverted or being bashful is sort of in service to the art.
Yes, you're the observer, standing back and watching everything. Yeah, yeah.
First time I read the book Roots, I was probably about 10 years old, I think. And I remember reading about the storytellers, the people that told the stories of the various tribes that would tell the history of the tribes. And I always thought it's like, that's the job I would have wanted, to be able to just document everyone's story and tell little tidbits about where this one came from and where that one came from. So yeah, even within stories, I would find ways to insert myself and see how I would want to be a part of that world.
So tell us about the origins of When Stars Rain Down.
Well, it started as a short story, part of a short story collection that I worked on with Crystal. And the story was it was 10 stories, and it traced this group of slaves and a group of slave owners from the mid 1600s all the way to the 1970s. So I followed these various families throughout their lives. And the particular story that When Stars Rain Down was based on, it was called Final Innings. And it was based on the white character, Jimmy Earl Ketchums. There was no, a lot of the characters that exist in this novel were either very small characters or were not even there. Like Opal, I think she was one sentence. And when I tried to write, I knew that particular family, that white family, that Black family, I knew I wanted to focus on their story. And I tried my best to write a novel with just Jimmy Earl. And bless his heart, he just didn't speak to me in that way. So then I thought I'll compromise and I'll write it in his voice, his grandmother's voice, Opal's voice, and Birdie's voice. And my agent and I, we received some, some attention. Some people said, yeah, this sounds good, but they felt it didn't have the focus that it needed. So I went back and decided, with my agent's help, to go back and rewrite it completely from Opal's voice. And that's when it just started, once I gave into the process, and when I realized, okay, you got to write a book completely from scratch again. Once I accepted that that was the path, it just all started coming to me. And I think I finished it in the summer.
Her voice is so strong, Angela.
Thank you.
So strong. Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think readers, if they haven't gotten the book yet, will fall in love with Opal.
Yeah.
It's interesting, I keep looking back down at this document, but even back then I had said about the man's voice. I assume this was about it. I said that it seemed so pure. So you already had that gift, but you had to transfer that purity of his voice over to Opal to make it fully, I guess, for it to gain all of its power, because it's a really powerful voice. And I think that that's one thing that makes your writing is beautiful, but I think the voice and the purity of that voice and the authenticity of that voice of Opal is what makes it so powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Now, one thing I noticed with both of you writers, that rural settings are very important to you. And I would assume it's because of your backgrounds. Both of you have rural backgrounds, but why is that important to you in setting your novels and your stories?
Well, I've always been of the mindset I truly embrace that idea of write what I know and write what speaks to me. Those two things, write what I know and or write what speaks to me. And so far, what has spoken to me every time has been some type of characters that I feel a connection back home to. I've lived out of the South for a little over 20 years now, but the South never left me. And so it's my way, I think, of pulling back those details. I think of my hometown, and all of the elders that I grew up with are gone. I mean, they passed on. And this is my way, I think, of holding on to them. When I was in, the other reason why I'm so grateful for Crystal and finding her is that when I was an undergraduate, I had a teacher who said to me that these characters this is not going to sell. No one wants to read this. And at that time, because she was a teacher and I had the ultimate, there was, my daddy and God and teachers and authors, they were all in the little, hierarchy of people I respected. So when she said to me, my stories would never find an audience, I believed her. So I tried to take little country girls and put them in Paris. And then I tried to take them to New York, and it never resonated with me. So I just made the decision then, okay, well then if no one wants to read what I've written, then maybe this is not the life for me. So I went in a totally different direction. And then I started discovering all of these voices again from my past books that I'd read, and then also discovering writers like Crystal and Silas, who just, were embraced who they were and were unapologetic about it. And I felt like, okay, well, if they can embrace their culture and where they come from and not feel like they've got to be something that they're not, then I can do that too.
So first of all, Angela, we need an address. Just drop her name so we can send her a gift. She needs about 3 or 4 copies of this book to make sure she knows. For me, I'm country. I fought it for a long time, especially when I went to undergrad. I tried to practice my elocution in the mirror to make sure my voice changed so that I wouldn't be made fun of. And then there was a point as a writer of just embracing that. And although I've lived away from home longer than I lived home, I actually left home at 16. I graduated from high school at 16 and went to college. That's where my literary imagination lives. And I think that in some way, even though I'm writing fiction, but in a big way, I'm always paying homage to my ancestors and to the community that I grew up in. So that's why I continue to do it. I did the same thing. Our stories are so similar. I did the same thing of trying to put people in the city, and it just didn't work. What worked was to embrace myself and then to be able to embrace the characters without shame, with great pride, and just walk into it.
Not to embarrass you, Crystal, but in something I read, I saw a quote from you that being country is as much a part of me as my full lips, wide hips, dreadlocks, and high cheekbones. I love that quote.
Yes,
And
that's
here
right.
it is.
I had dreadlocks and
and here it is, Earth Day, and one thing that you said is often, Black people aren't associated with nature, but I think one of the things you said is nature can be very healing for Black people, especially Black women. Why did you say that?
Yeah, part of that I think is about the birds of opulence and the characters in there. But I think about it also in regard to all of us. I think we have a missed opportunity, of course, with the pandemic. We can't go out as much, but I think that something that our elders did, our ancestors did, and the way they communed with the land was a part of the rhythm of their bodies and part of the daily routine. And I think that we get caught up in our city lives, which are wonderful. I love my city life. But I never know what it means until I try to do it intentionally now, but most often over the years, it was an accident. I would be stressed from work and I just feel so horrible. And then I'd go to a nature sanctuary, maybe happen to a park where there were lots of big trees, and I could just suddenly feel it because it reminded me of home, and there was sort of an ease of the tension out of my body. And that's when I first discovered it, and have been trying to find ways to help Black women get back. We need to go back to the woods, I think, every so often to be replenished.
Yeah. How about you, Angela? Is there something about the rural setting that draws you with your writing as well?
Absolutely. And I know one part of it is similar to Crystal's. Mine is always with food, mainly because I love eating it, but I also love recreating those foods, those dishes that make me think about the people that made them the first time. Like, for example, my daddy loved Miss Shug's dressing. She was a neighbor. And from the time I was about 21 or 22, I was bound and determined I was going to learn how to cook Miss Shug's dressing. So I'd go to her house probably a few days before Thanksgiving, a few days before Christmas, and I'd have to watch her because she'd say, "Baby, I don't do measurements. I don't even know if I have a measuring cup in here. You just gotta know to put it in there and then know when to stop." And so I'm steady trying to figure out when what's a pinch. So if I took a pinch and I put it in a spoon, what would that amount to? And I could never get it right. And then fast forward to the last Thanksgiving my daddy spent, and it was as if I could literally feel Miss Shug and every elderly Black woman who'd ever loved on me and tried to help me figure out how to cook. It's as if they were all in that kitchen at that one time and saying, "You're gonna fix this before he leaves this earth." And sure enough, Daddy wasn't eating anything much at that time, but I gave him a little spoonful of that dressing. He says, girl, I think this is better than Shug's.
Oh.
And it resonated in me, and it becomes a part of, I don't think there's a single story I've ever written where people weren't cooking and gathering together and having family meals, because that was always so much a part of life back then. We might not have had a lot of money, but there was never a Christmas or a Thanksgiving where we didn't all walk away thinking we can't eat another bite. You know, so that's just my part of my life that I think back to and try to recreate in the city with my own cooking.
Yeah, I do that too. Food is important. Like it's the sensory nature of food. And one of the things that I do is I hang up my grandmother's dress in the kitchen when I'm cooking, and I still have a jar of the last green beans that she canned, and she died in 1994. And when me and Ron got together, he said, what is this? I said, don't you touch that. Do not touch that. And I just have that there, and I hang her dress up and try to, that's the most soothing thing, to try to make something like she made it.
Oh, that's so touching. What does the dress look like?
It has flowers on it. I wish I'd know we was going to talk about this. I'd whip it out because it's in the other room, but she was a real short woman. So she was just barely 5 foot tall. I've put it on before and it looks like a shirt on me. But it's a double knit dress that she made, and it has like a paisley pattern with flowers in it. And I remember, we don't have any pictures, I don't think, of her with it on, but I remember her wearing it. And so when my cousins would come over before the pandemic, I'd pull it out and we look at it. I have little artifacts like that about my grandparents. So I have Granny's dress, I have my grandfather's cap and knife, I have my grandmother's glasses. So I like having those things around, and they do instantly take me back home.
Crystal has this amazing photograph of her grandfather, and I think he has like a little stub of a cigar in his mouth. And I never had grandparents growing up. So in my mind, I just think about, if I'd gone over to Crystal's house, they would have been like my little surrogate grandparents. I always wanted to gravitate to where the elders were. So she probably wouldn't have been able to keep me away from the house just so I could be up under her grandparents. Because I look at those pictures, and because I have so much of an absence of that kind of background, really my life revolved around my dad and his brothers, and that was, and their wives, and that was my whole world. So I'm always taking other folks' relatives and grandparents and claiming them as my own.
Yes.
They would have loved you. They would have loved you. And you would have been able to stay as long as you wanted to.
Well, we've got some questions coming in from people who are with us here. Let's see what I can find here. That Angela, as an adult, how do you relate to Opal?
Well, I relate to her in the sense that she represents so many of the women and older women and younger women that I grew up around. One thing that I very consciously wanted to do with that novel, and I think that's why Opal eventually, her voice resonated above everyone else, is I wanted to reclaim the story of the Black domestic worker. These were women that I grew up around, women that cleaned houses, cooked for white families, took care of their babies, and they were smart. They understood how to stretch a dollar. They understood how to talk in code when they were around these white folks. It was always so funny to me to watch them shapeshift, where one moment, yes, ma'am, miss, I'm gonna get that done in just a minute. Yes, ma'am. Oh yeah, I love being here. And then the white woman would walk out, You better not say nothing else to me, I know that. And I was like, where does this come from? And so when I would be with my dolls, I would do the voices. When one of the dolls, a little skinny Barbie doll, she'd be the white lady that my dolls work with. And we do those little code switching moments between them. So I knew that I wanted to bring those women to life in a way that showed respect and honored them, as opposed to turning them into caricatures. So these women are women that I've loved my entire life. And even with the degrees on the wall, I would give it all up to have a half of their integrity and the love that they showed to me and the community as a whole. The way they loved on these white babies, even when it meant they had to put their babies aside, and they loved and cared for them. And I would watch them try to imprint goodness into these children, that if I teach them, not the hokey Hollywood way, but through the earnest prayers, where on a Sunday they would devote their prayers to praying for these folks. And I'm thinking, why are you wasting your prayer time praying for these folks? The way they treat us, the way they're treating you. So, that was what I was after, to recapture a bit of their spirit and to show honor and respect to my ancestors.
Here's a really good question. What advice would you give your younger self when that teacher said your work wasn't good enough or right to write about? What would you tell a writer who might have experienced the same kind of silencing or shutdown of their true stories?
Wow, what would I say to that? You know what? I would tell her to be patient, because to be perfectly honest, I needed that time to grow and develop. Not that way. I didn't need that violence done to me, but I did need that time and that space, because what I did end up doing is I spent years just studying other writers. I would always buy 2 copies of a book, one to put on the shelf and look pretty, and then another for me to underline and highlight and circle and engage with that book. I have 2 copies of Crystal's books. I've done the same thing with them, because I wanted to understand why did they make certain choices here? Why did they turn a phrase in this way? And if I had just jumped headlong into writing, I don't think I would have developed my craft the way that I did, so that when the time came where those stories were ready to come out of me, I was prepared. Now, if my older self to go back and tell that woman, it would just be to say, you have no right. You have no right. The only thing you need to do is to help me become a better storyteller. But you don't get to decide who wants to read these books. That's for the public to decide. And I try to believe that maybe she thought she was telling me good advice. I don't know. It's easier to just leave her in the past and not worry about her, because she didn't stop the train. The train kept going.
Right. Don't you think she probably fueled the fire too, whether it was consciously or unconsciously within you, that there was a fire in your belly that you were going to do this, and that's why you started buying 2 copies of the books and doing all that studying, just to prove, not to her, but to yourself and to your soul, that this was your passion, and it was fueled by that, is what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, and the other thing that it did, and so I'm grateful to her for this, that it helped me to become a better teacher, because I've never, not consciously, and if I ever did, I'll apologize to any student that I did it to, I never shut down anyone's passion. If a student came to me and said, I want to write the next Harlequin romance, well, I haven't read a Harlequin romance since I was in high school. But if that's what you want to do, baby, I will help you write the best Harlequin romance possible. So I just decided that I'm never going to be a dream killer. I'm going to push you. I'm going to encourage you to find things in your writing that you didn't know that you could do, like my teachers did for me later on. But I'm never going to kill someone's dream, because who am I? Who am I to say that's not what you should write.
Someone asks, what is your writing process? Crystal, you want to take that first?
Sure. My process is that I have a lot of ideas and they come around sort of like a Rolodex. But an idea has to pop up more than once for me to write it. So I have to be haunted by an idea and driven that way to pick it up and to start. And then for me, I keep a notebook and I, scribble little things in it. Sometimes in my computer, I might write part of a story. The story that was just announced yesterday that won the O. Henry Award. It started in 2006. I worked on it every so often. I don't believe in writer's block. So every time I feel like I can't work on the current project, I go in my files and I find something else. So I've been fiddling with that story all this time since 2006. And then I went on a writing retreat in 2019. And that's when I finished it. And I sent it out and it got published. And I felt like that it had the weight of all those years behind it. The other thing I can say about my process is that I love to get up early in the morning. I think as women, we have so much on our table. So at 4 a.m. or sometimes at 3 a.m., the man next door is not doing whatever he's doing. I don't have to wash dishes. I don't have to wash clothes. I don't have to cook. I don't have to grade papers. And so that for me lends itself to writing. And then I write toward daylight, start at 3 and then try to be finished by 7 before the day starts. Now, do I always do that? Not always, but that's ideal for me when I can do that.
How about you, Angela?
I'm wondering if I got this from Crystal, because I do have the similar notion that there's no such thing as writer's block. It's just, I'm not prepared, whether I've not done my research or maybe I've not really sat with these characters and really figured out who they are appropriately. But once I put in the work to get to know the story, to get to know the characters, the only thing that stops me is that there's just not enough hours in the day to get everything done. But I do write every single day. I learned from a friend at Spalding, Katie Yoakum, said, even if you just write a sentence, then you won't feel bad about yourself because you can say you've written every day. And so I've made that commitment to myself. Every single day, I'm going to put at least a sentence on the page, sometimes more, sometimes, but never less. And just preparation. I write a lot of historical fiction, so I have no choice but to dig in and do the research. And that's where a lot of inspiration comes. I'm reading a lot of old newspapers, seeing what was happening in the world, 60, 70, 80 years ago, and just allowing that in many cases to be my inspiration.
Talk more about that, about the historical nature of some of the things you write. How much of the research do you do before you write?
I do quite a bit before, because I don't feel comfortable. Like I would never have felt comfortable just trying to tell Opal's story without knowing something about the world Opal lived in. Mm-hmm. I think that would be very arrogant of me to say, oh, well, I'm a Black woman too. I was 18 at one point, so I can just tell her story. I don't know what it's like to be a Black woman from 1936. So I knew I needed to read newspapers. I needed to find old diaries. I needed to find books that were written during that period of time. So I needed to immerse myself into that world and assume that I know nothing. That's my sort of how I approach writing historical fiction. I just assume I know nothing. I don't take anything for granted. Even things that I think I know, I check and I double check just to make sure that I got it right, as close to right as I possibly can as a human. and recognizing that a 2021 Black person and a 1936 Black person, they're night and day of how they'll deal with things. Like I tease my students who oftentimes when we look at slave stories and they always want to say, well, if I'd been back then, I wouldn't have been a slave, or they wouldn't have done this to me. And I always try to be patient because I realize they only know what they know. And what they know is the here and now. And they know rebellion and they know, fighting back. But the way in which people fight back or would fight back during the 1930s is quite different, because the ability for them to punch back at Jim Crow is just not the same.
Mm-hmm. Someone asked, how has this story changed you? Has it changed you?
I don't know that. Well, I think it has definitely increased my confidence and my ability to tell a good story. And that's the other thing that people need to know about writers, is that we're very insecure people, or at least most of us are. There's some out there that are very arrogant. They know that they are the best thing since sliced bread. I don't know that about myself, even now, as I'm working on the next novel. I was telling Robert, I'm afraid. What if I can't write something as good as the last time? What if it's not received in the same way? And thankfully, I have a husband that says, just write the story, Angela. Why are you worrying about people out there? You never worried about them before. So just write the story. But if you don't have someone in your ear that can give you that feedback that you need, it can be a very daunting process. So that has helped my self-esteem, but it's also made me very nervous about the next book.
Yeah.
And it will, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. It's like reinventing yourself. Even I know you're writing about some of the same world or the next world adjacent to that world. But it's all new, right? Each time you have to sort of like, can I do this again? Can I dive in? Can I get as deep as I did the first time?
Right. I mean, because once you have to start thinking about other people in your writing life, before it was just me. And then I hope I'll find an agent. And then I hope the agent will find a publisher. Well, now all those things are in place and people are anticipating that you're going to get things to them. And the publishers, they have their own agendas. They've got a sales team that says, I need her to write something similar to what she did before so that we can, market it to the same people. When I'm saying, no, I don't want to write the exact same book that I wrote before, but then maybe I should. Maybe that's what I should be, So you have all these voices and you just have to find a place, a way to go back to that place that made you want to write in the first place. Mm-hmm. So I try to tell myself, I'm not getting up this morning to write for my agent or my editor or the readers. I'm getting up to do what I did when I was a little girl in Ayrton, Alabama, who would sit with her crayons and scribble on a piece of paper. And when my daddy would get home from work, I sit and read to him my stories. And he'd tell me, little girl, you're going to be a writer someday. I have to listen for that voice and try to push all those other voices out of my head.
The way you talk about your daddy, I love him too. Mm-hmm. I just love him too. What he did to make you who you are, Angela, I want to thank him. That's what I feel like every time you talk about your daddy.
Yeah. He was in his 50s when he adopted me, and all his life that was his dream, was to be somebody's daddy, and it never happened. And he got to the place where he said to his wife, either we adopt a child or I'm just going to have to go because I have to be a daddy. And so he poured, all those years that he wasn't able to be a daddy, he poured it all into me. And I wouldn't be the person that I am had I not had MC Jackson in my life.
What a gift. What a gift he had, what a gift you had. Amazing.
Now, on our Q&A, this person says, not a question, but a shout out to Crystal. I was a writing student at Kentucky's Governor's School for the Arts, and you are such a wise, encouraging teacher. Thank you, she said.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that.
Yes. And I should also mention that Professor Wilkinson, you'll be inducted tomorrow as Kentucky's Poet Laureate at 10 a.m. during Kentucky Writers' Day. Congratulations.
Thank you.
One can tune in on the Kentucky Arts Council Facebook page. So there's a little plug for you.
Oh, hey, Jill.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something else that I took from Crystal and so many of my teachers at Spalding was this notion that even though we focused on one discipline or one genre, like fiction was my main concentration, Sina Jeter Naslin, who ran that program, started that program, encouraged us all to write in different areas. You know, to write poetry, to write plays, if you're interested in plays, to write creative nonfiction. So we all just went away from that program, or at least I went away from that program feeling confident enough that if it was words on the page, I just had to figure out which way I had to organize them on the page, depending on whether it was a poem or a short story, what have you. So I'm very appreciative of the fact that we all, most of us, write in, you know, a bunch of different areas, and we feel comfortable doing it.
Well, that's a good segue to, hopefully you have chosen something from When Stars Rain Down that we can hear you read. Angela, can you do that?
Absolutely can.
We'll spotlight you, and Crystal and I will go away, and the stage is yours.
So I'm going to read a little bit about the character, or from the voice of the character, Miss Lavinia. She's a root woman. And for those of you who don't know what a root woman is, she practiced some version of hoodoo, or that's what was referred to when I was growing up. The woman and the boy removed their shoes and put them on the rack. Patrice Olden is my name. I came here from McDonough, Georgia. My friend, Elvira Miller, said she came to you before and you helped her with some things, Miss Patrice said. Miss Lavinia smiled, of course. You must give my best to Miss Miller. Opal, please go to the kitchen and heat up some water for some tea. I'm going to take Miss Olden and my grandson, Theophilus, she said, still gripping hard to his arm. Tell the ladies hello, Theophilus. Hello, ma'am, he said in a soft voice, not making eye contact with either Miss Lavinia or me. I wondered if he was the reason why the old lady was here. Miss Patrice looked over at me and then at her grandson as if she wasn't sure she should talk about herself in front of us. Miss Lavinia reached over and patted her hand. That seemed to give her the power to talk. I should never have married that young man, she said. He knew I was lonely after my old man died, and he came to me carrying some dark magic. I expect cause even though I know he got me with magic, I should let him go, but I don't want to let him go. He has spent my money unwisely and he doesn't treat me fair, so I had no hope other than you to help me figure this out. Miss Lavinia reached into her desk and took out an old snuff tin. She opened it and put a pinch of whatever was inside into one of the teacups I had brought. Pour the water into the cup and drink all of it before we speak. The old lady did what she was told, and after a few minutes of total quiet, Miss Lavinia spoke. Do you feel calm? Yes, the woman said, her voice sounding surprised. Calmer than I felt in days, maybe weeks or months. What's inside that tea? Miss Lavinia nodded. Calmness. Calmness is inside that tea. So let's begin. We should always be calm before we ask the spirits to intercede on our behalf. They will listen to us if we ask for their help in the right way. But we must always make sure we truly ask them for what it is we want, for what we really want. Now, do you believe in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost? Miss Patrice nodded. I do. Yes, ma'am, I do. Then we will talk to them first, Miss Lavinia said. What is it you want me to ask? And think careful before you respond. Miss Patrice looked down at the teacup and then she raised her head. I want my husband, my young husband, to be satisfied with me and me alone. I want him to stay put and to love me. Does that mean you want him to have relations with you or simply stay at home? Miss Lavinia asked. Remember, what we ask for is what the Godheads will give to us. We must always say what we mean and mean what we say. I want him in my bed. I want him to look at me with fresh eyes and to love what he sees. I want him to stop running the streets and stay at home when he's not at work. I want my man underfoot. And I know what that means. I'm 60. I won't be here for another 60 years, maybe not even for another 10 or 20 years. I don't mind spending whatever years I have left, having a man nearly half my age look at me as if I'm a young girl again. Do you still have the stamina? Miss Lavinia asked in a slow voice. By this point, I was feeling very embarrassed by this conversation, but I dared not get up. So I stared down at the floor while they continued to talk. I glanced over and noticed the grandson was still playing with the cat as if nothing strange was happening. I would like your help with that too, Miss Patrice said. I would like to be able to please my man whenever he wants. Miss Lavinia slowly nodded her head. Okay then, if you are sure that is what you want, then that is what we'll approach God with and see if that's acceptable to him.
That's the only thing about Zoom is you can't have. Don't have.
That was beautiful, Angela.
Thank you.
Hearing you read it is even better than just sitting down and reading it. Wonderful
Yeah.
to hear your voice. I know there's an audio book also, right?
There is an audio book, and she's just the reader is absolutely, Jonice is absolutely amazing. I was listening to it the other night and it was like listening to it with fresh ears to hear her read. So yes, check out the audio book.
Well, I want to thank you both. This was a wonderful conversation. And hopefully, I had my second COVID shot today, so hopefully we'll all get vaccinated and be able to meet in
And get
person
hugs.
sometime soon. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Celeste.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. I
Thank
love you.
I love you too.